which is about how old my daughter would be today. None of us bear parents start out as experts. It's something that we kind of fall into. So I laugh when Joyce said I'm an expert in the rare disease because it's not something I went to college for. So it all started around this picture. This is my 3 kids. This was back in early 2009. My son Ethan on the side, my daughter Abigail, and Hannah in the middle. This was just at a regular, losing my brain this morning, Halloween pumpkin picking picture. And it was the day after this that our lives completely went a different direction. So I was told to put together some objectives for this. Talk about how a strong foundation on how rare disease affects our population. Dr. Canlis kind of already jumped into that, so thank you for that. Describe how healthcare professionals can empower all of our families who are affected by rare diseases once they get a diagnosis and with ongoing care. And describe the ways that families like mine and like Heidi's and Heather's can impact treatment and standards of care. So just to talk a little bit about the education of rare disease. As we heard earlier today, rare disease affects, by the government, those that affect anything less than 200,000 in the US. In the UK, it's like 15,000. Statistics that I kind of wanted to bring to your attention. So for example, 80% of all rare diseases are genetic in nature. Now I know a lot of you deal with genetics of a more common type, but I just kind of wanted to throw that in there as something for you guys to think about. And the impact of rare disease actually impacts more people than cancer and AIDS combined. How many of you guys knew that? I don't see any hands. Oh, Heather, thank you. Yeah, I was gonna say, so it really, rare diseases in general affect 1 out of 10 Americans. So how many of you actually know somebody affected by a rare disease? Raise your hand. That actually looks like more than 1 in 10, doesn't it? And the thing is, many people in the rare disease community don't really connect to the quote rare disease community. We are a very large community, as you can tell. But many people get kind of siloed into their disorders. So part of my role as someone who works in the rare disease space is to kind of try and educate those in rare disease, affected by rare disease, that there's a huge community out there. And as we heard earlier, less than 5% of all rare diseases have an FDA-approved treatment. We are seeing more rare diseases getting more treatments. However, for those of us who are kind of in the weeds in this, many of the newer disorders many of the newer drugs that are getting FDA approvals, well, but thank goodness, are for diseases that may already have a treatment. So we have a long way to go in terms of finding treatments for the other 6,950 diseases. So my passion is childhood rare disease. That's kind of where I fell into. Approximately 50% of all the rare and genetic disorders affect kids under 18. And to really build on that statistics, 30% of children with a rare disease will not live to see their 5th birthday. And that's a fact, and my family, unfortunately, is one of those statistics. And then finally, rare diseases are responsible for 35% of the infant deaths. So rare disease really has a tremendous impact on children affected by these disorders. So I kind of wanted to share a little bit about my story, and I want to thank Christy and Joyce for inviting me up here, because like all of you who are parents, any opportunity to talk about our kids, you gotta take it. So Hannah was born in July of 2008. On our 34-week ultrasound, everything was fine up until then. 34-week ultrasound, they did a 4D, and they kind of noticed she had a big belly. At the time, we thought, well, mom's got a big belly, daddy's got a big belly. Hey, Hannah probably has a big belly too. Nobody caught the first sign of something that we could have caught. So our first 6 months, when she was born at 36 weeks because I had been put on bed rest at 29 weeks, and I started getting preeclampsia like many pregnancies. And what happened was they noticed her abdomen was big. She also had platelets of 6,000. Now, those of you who don't work in the medical space, platelets of 6,000 is a really strong word for a brain bleed. So the second day she was born, we only had one good medical day with her. The second day she was born, she was whisked off into the NICU. They started a whole bunch of tests. She's get jaundiced. They couldn't kind of start to figure out what was going on. Our third day, I was still in the hospital because I had complications from my cesarean, and my husband was spending the night. We had two other kids at a friend's house. And the nurses came in at like 3 in the morning, and for some reason I woke up, and I heard them say, well, their daughter doesn't need a kidney. And I woke up screaming. I woke my husband up, and I told him. He ran off chasing the nurses to find out, what the hell are you talking about? My daughter doesn't need a kidney. Well, they were just talking amongst themselves. They didn't realize what we were doing, but what we learned later was they had absolutely no clue what was going on with Hannah. Finally, they did an ultrasound, and it turns out it was her spleen that was enlarged. So we were looking at low platelets and enlarged spleen. So this was basically our first 6 months of life, trying to find a diagnosis. She had more blood draws than any child I've ever met at the time, more blood draws than I ever had, and I went through 4 years of infertility treatments, ultrasounds, IVIG infusions. We saw many specialists, and we were connected with Texas Children's Hospital at the time, which was one of the leading pediatric hospitals in the country. Yet they still couldn't figure out what was going on. They did testing on her, and because they assumed it was a lysosomal storage disease, she was showing signs of Gaucher disease. So they did that blood test, and it turns out she was actually a carrier. So we started looking into other LSDs, like Niemann-Pick, Tay-Sachs, etc. And I started connecting at the time with those families because I needed answers. My husband and I needed answers. So finally, after 6 months, we still have no answers. So my husband, her liver started getting enlarged too. TCH was convinced it was not Gaucher disease. My husband met Dr. Google, typed in enlarged spleen, enlarged liver, and low platelets, and of course, what's the first thing that comes up? Gaucher disease. So we went back to our hematologist and our geneticist and said, look, it's gotta be this, all signs are pointing to Gaucher disease. Long story short, they did a fibroblast, and sure enough, it was Gaucher disease. So my husband likes to give himself credit that he actually diagnosed our daughter. So we got her diagnosis, finally at the age of 7 months. This is what she looked like at 7 months. Yeah, she's a cutie, isn't she? Yeah, but the problem was we're sitting with the geneticist and her team at Texas Children's Hospital, and they gave us the diagnosis. She's got neuronopathic Gaucher disease, and she likely won't see her first birthday. There's no cure. She'll take her home and love her. That was our marching orders from Texas Children's Hospital. So I can't even imagine what it would be like if we were at a hospital that had less information. And so we literally, this was taken the same week we got this diagnosis. Now, does this look like a child who's not going to see 5 months? No, because she was very happy, very outgoing. She was delayed, definitely had special needs. So we kind of became parents on a mission. So what did we do? We kind of divided and conquered. We had 3 young kids at home now. My husband was working full-time. I quit my job, remote job, to become a full-time advocate. We were on a mission to save our daughter's life. So, I reached out to every researcher and scientist, anybody who published a PubMed article on Gaucher disease or any of the related LSDs, just to find some information. I connected with organization leaders from these disorders. And I quickly learned that Gaucher disease, for those of you who know about lysosomal storage diseases, Gaucher disease is a very unique disease because there's 3 subtypes. The first subtype is basically non-neurologic. And at the time, it actually had a treatment. When Dr. Canlis posted all the expensive treatments, Cerazide was actually used to be #1, so it's nice to see that's finally dropped off the list of most expensive treatments. So there was a treatment for type 1. However, type 2 and type 3, which was the infantile and the juvenile, were what they call neuronopathic, or layman's terms for us was the neurodegenerative. And there was no treatment. But because there was so much research being done on type 1, nobody was looking at type 2 and 3. It was almost like our subtypes were kind of forgotten about, because 95% of those with Gaucher disease are type 1. So I found a few researchers across the world, literally 3, who were focusing on this, and they told us they had no money, they had very little resources. I ended up sending Hannah's fibroblast to the to Israel, the UK, and Canada because that's where the researchers were. And then we also joined part of the natural history study, the National Institutes of Health for their Gaucher 1. And then because we wanted to get some more Gaucher 2 and 3 information, we really kind of pushed ourselves to get that kind of information started because we wanted to be studied too. We were just as much Gaucher disease as Gaucher type 1. And to make matters worse, the National Gaucher Foundation, which was the only support organization in the US for Gaucher, only supported type 1. So we really had nothing. So having a background in business, I always joke I'm a fourth generation entrepreneur by nature because parents, grandparents, all the way down the line. And having a marketing background, the first thing that I could think of doing was to bring awareness to Hannah's disorder and to Hannah, to try and get people interested in having conversations with us. So I put together a video. Now, do you guys remember the video, Charlie bit my finger? Okay, this is around that time. So this was before we had YouTubers and really viral videos. And it was also the second season of Keeping Up with the Kardashians. So for any of you who watched that show, you can see how long ago this video was done. But this was our first outreach into advocacy. So, not too far, I think. Let's see. Oh, there's no sound. Hold on a second. Not that you really need sound, it's just music, but. And then it's going to come to my rescue again. I got you guys all set up for this video, and now we have to.
We're on the edge of our seats.
So another interesting thing about this video, it was at a time when we didn't really have viral videos for people like us. But within the first year and a half, we had over 20,000 views. So it was kind of exciting that back then that was a big number. Nowadays, that's like a day for some people. But it was kind of exciting to us that we actually were starting to get some reach with it. And the music does work as well. We just showed video. Okay, so again, I wanted to just introduce Hannah to the world and why she was important. So let's see if this will make the video go. There we go. And now picture pretty music in the background. So this was her at her birth. Those were her IVIG. You can see the enlarged spleen at 3 weeks. And that was Hannah on her first Seizures treatment, which was a 2-week infusion. So that was our video, and again, it's not as strong without music, but we really wanted to show there had never been a type 2, type 3 child recognized outside of a medical journal until we started sharing Hannah's story. So it was really important for us we knew in order to create awareness and to get people interested, that we had to put a face with the disorder. So that's where our advocacy started. And then we had her first birthday party. It was a huge event. We invited our whole entire neighborhood in Texas, and it was absolutely fantastic. So then we kind of fell into our new normal life. We had 3 kids, so that our life kind of balanced between fun and then procedures and therapies. Because Hannah had 6 different therapists. She had a physical therapist, occupational therapist, vision therapist, mental therapist, hydrotherapist, and I always miss the last one, which she'll probably never forgive me, but I just can't remember what it is. But that became our life. So you can see some of our favorite pictures up there on the top is Hannah eating dipping dots for the first time. Needless to say, she liked it. And then our kids playing with the DS, electronics, because my kid doesn't like electronics. And then, Hannah really, her champion for Ethan and Abby. Abby was 3.5 years older than her. Ethan was 6 years older than her. But then, as you can see, we did have a lot of procedures. We had EEGs, MRIs, a lot of therapy. So that kind of became our new normal, and trying to fit that in. My husband and I knew the prognosis in the back of our head. We never told the children. We never told Ethan and Abby. They just knew she had a special needs system. But during that time, we also were advocating like crazy. We knew we had to do more work to get out. So I had started a blog right before Hannah got diagnosed. It's still actually out there called littlemishannah.com. I just shared our story, the good, the bad, and the ugly, on trying to get a diagnosis, once we got a diagnosis, trying to find researchers, people to help. And we got on a media campaign. In between this, we moved to Texas. From Texas to Las Vegas. So Hannah actually, from what we know, what we've been told, kicked off Rare Disease Day in Las Vegas for the first time, the year before she passed away. Needless to say, she wasn't happy being on TV. She literally cried the entire time during it. More impact, right? But that was the first Rare Disease Day event. That was back in 2011. I was able to get her story in the Scientist magazine, Time magazine, and a lot of other media features. Because there was a treatment, which for the type 1, really worked on their liver, their spleen, their bones. It didn't cross the blood-brain barrier, so for us, it gave Hannah a better quality of life. The neurodeterioration still would happen, but we were able to let her roll around and place a lot of those other organs. She was able to do. And then they had a Cerezyme shortage. Genzyme, which is now Sanofi, at the time, they had a contamination in their facility. So they literally stopped production for Cerezyme for the entire world. And that was a lot of patients. And when we found out that they were gonna also stop it for the type 2-3 kids, that's where the dragon mom, Joyce, thing started coming out. We call a dragon mom someone whose child has a life-limiting disorder or who's passed away, who go above and beyond crazy in terms of getting things corrected for their child, whether it's their child specifically or their rare disease community. So I became a dragon mom. I got her story again in the Boston Globe, the Washington Post when this happened, because she became the token child as to what happens when biotech pharma has an oops. This is a huge oops. So with the support of, I can say now because she's no longer working for Genzyme, with their VP of advocacy, I was actually able to get to the head people at Genzyme. It started off with this email and ended up with emails, phone calls, and 2 trips to Boston to make sure that all type 2-3 kids still receive treatment during the 18 months shortage. So our type 2-3 kids did not miss a treatment because we would have lost a lot of kids if we weren't able to get them treatment. So that's kind of how one direction our advocacy went. So we, like I said, Hannah was kind of like a special needs child. We kind of fell into our new normal. And then so the summer of 2010, she had aspiration pneumonia, which is something Gaucher kids get. But for some reason, she ended up having a grand mal seizure when we were giving her an albuterol treatment. This started our 42-day hospitalization. We were still in Texas during part of this time. And the seizure led to multiple seizures and to a very extreme movement disorder. We almost lost her twice. And during this hospitalization, during weeks 2 and 3, we had sold our house in Texas because my husband had got laid off in Houston and we were moving to Las Vegas where my in-laws live. So during weeks 2 and 3, Ethan, Abby, and my husband and the 2 dogs and the cat drove to Vegas, and I was staying at Texas Children's Hospital in between the Ronald McDonald House and the PICU lobby, dealing with Hannah. So she went from being being special needs to kind of being medically complex, medically fragile. She developed a very intense movement disorder. The week 2 picture was the kids wanted to see their sister, and this was the best picture we can do. And the reason she's holding Abigail's little stuffed animal is because her movement disorder was so intense. This was the only way we were able to cover it in the picture to keep her arms down. Week 3, she ended up having some surgeries. We ended up with a G-tube and a trach, which we were hoping to avoid, which is, as you saw in the video, we kind of knew to expect that. But finally, week 5, she kind of turned a corner, and they flew us home on the Kangaroo Crew, which is Texas Children's Hospital's medical ambulance, to Las Vegas. And that's Hannah looking out over the Grand Canyon on our way back to Vegas, our way to Vegas to our new home. We hadn't even seen our new house yet, but Ethan and Abby and my husband had been living there for a month. So she went from special needs to medically fragile. We were kind of naive at the time watching the progression of the disease. Looking back now, we should have probably picked up, yeah, it was a lot worse than we thought it was. It got to the point she couldn't sit up anymore unassisted, where she used to be able to play in her walker. She couldn't even crawl anymore. The picture on the bottom middle is Ethan holding a toy that she used to be able to hold and play catch with, or roll catch, whatever we call it. So our new life became nursing. We had nursing for 8 hours a day. We took advantage of the nursing in a way to try to keep our family together. So I would do the night shift while the nurse would do the time when the kids are in school, Ethan and Abby. So we would at least have time as a family after school for all of us to be together. She still continued on her Serozyme treatments. And then things started getting more complicated. Our goal with Hannah was always pain-free and happy. Whenever you have a child with a life-limiting disorder, especially an LSD, that's really the best you can do is pain-free and happy. And then we noticed she wasn't happy anymore. So we got to the point we knew she was becoming end stage. She was hospitalized for a month, and long story short is they did another MRI, compared it to the one at the NIH we did as part of the natural history study, and it turned out she had tremendous white matter loss. So they gave us a couple Hail Mary options and we just couldn't do it, like brain drilling and a medically induced coma, and Hannah was just miserable. So we just decided Hannah was done fighting. We kind of stopped our advocacy efforts because we just wanted to focus on our family. And she stayed at home with us for 7 weeks, sedated around the clock, because her brainstem dysfunction made her so uncomfortable that we couldn't keep her awake for more than 5 minutes at a time. So this was us during the last week of her life in various stages. Abigail would crawl into, because Hannah had a twin-size bed, and Abigail would crawl in and sleep with her most nights. And that was a picture we took at one of the times. Ethan would always just be laying at the top of her bed. People underestimate the effect of these diseases on siblings. And that's something for another topic, and so that's kind of what happened. Then she passed away on December 4th, 2011 at the age of 3. She was at home with all of us. She passed away in my arms. And it is probably the most surreal situation is having your child die in your arms. It sucks. And Heather and I were, I'm sorry. Okay, as Heather knows, we talked about this sucks. But I couldn't be done advocating. It was in me to fight for these kids. I had met so many families that had children with different disorders that it became less about finding treatment for Gaucher as it was about just helping kids with rare diseases. But we continued advocating. I put together the first Facebook group for type 2-3 families. And again, this was a disorder that at the time Hannah was diagnosed, she was one of 50 in the US, 300 in the world. So we are really, really small. 200,000 would have been like a dream for us. But we ended up, and this is today, our group is now 8 years old. We have 273 members from all over the world. And a few years back, I put together this collage of our kiddos. Of course, Hannah's in the top corner because she's my baby. And then as I was putting this together, again, I'm just a mom, I'm not a scientist, but I started noticing all our type 2 kids, the infants, had the same nose. So I don't know if you can know, they all have cute little button noses, right? So I went to our NIH researcher, who I still keep in very close contact with, because I still do as much as I can to help them. And I showed her this. And because they only had worked with maybe 6 or 7 Gaucher kids, type 2, they never noticed this before. So after many conversations, that nose, that's the first physical characteristic of Gaucher type 2 to be ever recognized, and it actually got published in their clinical care medical journal, which for us as a small community was huge. So now it's actually easier for families, and we've actually noticed we're getting more families since physicians start using this as part of their standards of care. So I'm kind of proud that Hannah had a hand in helping other families get diagnosed. And after Hannah passed away, my husband and I, like I said, we didn't want to continue to stop advocating, but we also were selfish, and that we knew we wanted to give Hannah a legacy, because that's really important to us. We don't want anybody to forget Hannah. She was feisty, she was outgoing, she was full of smiles. So we created the Little Miss Hannah Foundation literally 2 days after she passed away, partially in honor of Hannah's memory, but mostly to honor Ethan and Abby, because as siblings, it's a really tough life, especially at that young age. So we wanted to help the kids here and now today, because research may help. I use the word may because there's a lot of groups that do research and they never get to where they want to go. But we wanted to help the kids today. So we created it with a mission to help kids diagnosed with rare, life-limiting, and medically complex conditions. We are very specific in that we don't work with kids with autism or Down syndrome, or pediatric cancer, because there's so many support groups out there that work with these families. So we wanted to kind of be the goal for all the rest of the families, whether they're rare or diagnosed. So we are now almost 8 years old. As of September, we've worked with over 200 families representing 125 rare diseases, and that's just in the Las Vegas area. And these are some of our little kiddos. There are VIPs. And these are kind of our primary program. Our main program is our medical and therapy equipment. We have purchased over 150 pieces of medical equipment, like special needs car seats, tricycles, feeding chairs, sitting chairs, things that insurance companies don't feel are medically necessary, but you as a parent, you want to enhance their quality of life, create safety for them. That's our primary sport. We also do a lot of family activities, like we're having our 3rd annual Halloween party coming up next month. As below, we had over 100 people show up to our local aquarium, and we never charge our families for anything because we know they go through enough. We do a lot of rare disease advocacy, and we also put together a college scholarship. And actually, I'm really excited this year. It used to be just for siblings, but we've actually expanded it thanks to very successful fundraising efforts to include parents affected by children with rare disease and then the patients themselves. And I'm excited, even though we don't close till November 15th with the applications, we've already received 2 parent applications for scholarships who are going back to school, one studying to be an OT and one studying to be a nurse. So if we can kind of help the families, we're kind of excited about that. And again, this is just kind of a little bit of an overview. I won't go into full detail into what we do through our foundation, but community support is a really big deal for us. We want the community of Las Vegas, which is I think between 2 and 3 million people at this point, to embrace these families. So every year on Rare Disease Day, who knows what day Rare Disease Day is?
Last day of February.
And there you go. How many of you didn't know that the last day of February is Rare Disease Day? Raise your hand, be honest. Oh my goodness, okay. So if you walk away with anything, Rare Disease Day is the last day of February. And February 29th. And why is it? Because it's the rarest day of the year. There you go. Mind blown, right? I take no credit for that. But on Rare Disease Day, we hold our Vegas Cares About Rare Kids 5K. All of our Rare Kids are event VIPs. It's to bring awareness, and it's our biggest fundraiser of the year. But mostly it's to encourage the families to come out and just show how special their kids are. We give them VIP buttons so they get high fives by the community. We just really want to have Las Vegas embrace these families. And we're very fortunate that we get a lot of media exposure and media support. So that's made it a lot easier. So not only do we do the Little Miss Hannah Foundation, I've actually kind of turned my advocacy into a full-time career. I got kids in college, so I was gonna pay the bills. So I went back after Hannah passed away, and I got my MBA in healthcare management because reality is, unless you have letters behind your name, you're just looked at as a rare mom, and you don't have as much power. It's the only reason I went back for the MBA. But I also started working for an organization called Global Genes, which is a national, or it's technically international, organization that works with rare disease groups. And I kind of gone in on the ground floor with them. I worked with being able to work with hundreds of rare disease patients and parents like me. With my business background, I've been able to help them kind of build their organizations. And I also created their Foundation Alliance program, which when I left, had over 300 rare disease groups working together. Now, 2 years later, it's like almost 500, so it's exciting to see that grow. But it's an umbrella, it's a support umbrella for all these rare disease groups. I've been very fortunate to be able to work on projects with biotech and pharma, including advisory boards, parent-patient conferences, and I facilitate quite a few discussions. I do a lot of public speaking on advocacy, relationships between biotech and pharma, nonprofit building, etc. But I kind of wanted to close this presentation out with talking about what you guys can do for families like me. So I will be completely honest and say, when you get this, when you're a parent or you're a family member and you get this kind of diagnosis, once you hear the word, your mind shuts off. So here's the facts as you think about that, about the patient-physician dynamics. Average time to diagnosis is 7.6 years for a rare disease family. Typical visits, it usually takes up to 8 physicians, 4 specialists to find that diagnosis, and many, where the majority receive conflicting information. And most often than not, we as rare disease parents, patients, have to educate our healthcare professionals. And now I get that there's 7,000 rare diseases, so I can't expect you guys to know every single one. That's not realistic. We as parents have an obligation to embrace that opportunity to educate. So a few years ago, I was able to work with Global Genes and Shire on this rare disease impact report. And I strongly, if you're interested in rare disease physician-patient dynamics, to download this. I wish they would update this. So these are just some of the statistics, but as you can see, if you just kind of go through them, the physicians have a really complicated time working with rare disease families. It could be lack of information, lack of support, lack of understanding, lack of time and capacity. I'm very aware of how much time how much burden that physicians and their teams have, so I strongly recognize that. It needs to be a partnership. But as you can see, based on these percentages, there's a lot of work that we need to do as rare disease advocates and supporters to be able to try and lighten that burden a little bit, work closer together. Here are some more statistics on the financial consequences. I am very upfront and honest in saying that our journey with Hannah has been a very financially taxing one for our family, to the point of almost bankruptcy twice, because our insurance company didn't cover a lot of stuff. Also, I had to stop working because she required 24-hour care, and having a nurse 8 hours a day doesn't really cover it. So it's emotionally draining, financially draining, psychosocially draining. It changes the whole dynamic of your relationships with friends and family. My family could not handle having a disabled and dying grandchild, so they stepped back. Where my in-laws were jumped on board, and they were like, might as well have been the second parent, so I saw both of those. So again, these are just some statistics that you can download from the report. And this is basically how the emotional impact on the patients. There's a lot of colors in the 60 to 90% range. This includes everything from depression, worry, anxiety. It's a very emotionally taxing lifestyle when you have a child, especially with a child with a life-limiting rare disease. So I wanted to go over ways that you guys in this room, and you can share this with your colleagues, I hope you do, can support newly diagnosed families. And the first one is just understand the burden that their lives are going to change completely from that moment on. It's going to, like I said, it's going to change their financial, their psychosocial, their economic, and their family dynamics. Really, the biggest problem when I talk to new families is information overload. So I don't know the ethics of this, so I will leave that to the healthcare professionals in the room. But encouraging them to voice record your meeting with them, especially in those first few meetings with them, so they can go back and listen to that information, would be a huge benefit, because they're not going to think about that. Have your team take the time to find out if there's any nonprofits that support that disorder. Even if it's one nonprofit that happens to be in the UK, because 50% of rare diseases don't have a foundation. Get them that information. Let them walk away with something tangible. Don't just tell them to take them home and love her. That was the biggest mistake Texas Children's did with us, because that pissed me off. But being the crazy mom like I am, I decided to do something about it. Not many parents are not like me. I recognize I'm very crazy and a little bit obsessive about this stuff, and Heather's shaking her head because she's like, yeah, me too. We're a unique breed of advocates, let's just put it that way. But if you don't have a nonprofit or some support information, either locally or nationally for that disorder, there's Global Genes and NORA, National Organization for Rare Diseases. They both have teams that will work with these families to find them some kind of support, whether it's symptom related or something. There is support. If families are diagnosed, I am a huge proponent of the Undiagnosed Disease Network out of Harvard. You don't have an answer, they will help you find an answer. And I was telling my new friend Tara back there, I am a huge worshiper of genetic counselors. I think you guys, like I told you, are the unsung heroes of the rare disease space. We don't have enough, but if you have the ability to connect them with a genetic counselor or a child life or a medical therapy specialist, they're going to need somebody to talk to with all this stuff. It's overwhelming. And then encourage the parent and caregiver to become advocates for themselves, for their child. Give them the confidence that they can have partner conversations with you and your team. Don't make, many times they're so overwhelmed they don't know the questions to ask. Start having those conversations to draw out questions to their capacity. And finally, because I am such a huge fan of the Undiagnosed Disease Program, I gave it its own slide. This program is connected to probably some of the top research institutions, academic institutions in the US, like Baylor, Vanderbilt, UCLA, the NIH. That you can apply for the program. Not everybody gets accepted, but they do have a 30% success rate in finding a diagnosis for previously undiagnosed families. So they're out of Harvard. Tell them Carrie sent you. And then finally, to close up, I wanted to introduce you to some friends of mine. I am not that unique in the rare disease advocacy space. There are people who have done many more impressive things than I have. I just get to be the one to talk with you today, so I wanted to kind of just introduce you to some friends of mine. Melissa Hogan, who's a mom with son with Hunter syndrome. In less than 2 years, she's raised over $2 million to get 9 boys into a clinical trial for Hunter syndrome. Beena Shaw, Project AP, is only 6 months old. They had their first international conference this summer, and they had over 70 families. When they only thought there were only 30 families in the world. So she's finding families left and right. Christina and Matt Might, University of Utah people may know Dr. Might. He used to be a professor of computer science there. They had the first child diagnosed with NLAB 1, and now Matt and I are working with NCATS, which is part of an institution at the NIH, and a biotech to work on translational medicine for NLAB 1. Luke Rosen, another new family that came on a couple of years ago. Has already found 240 families with his disorders, always 2 mouths. And these are just some other people. And I just wanted to shout out to my friend Heather, because Heather stand up. She is another mom like me, so I would strongly encourage you to talk to Heather and share her story, because I'm not unique in the rare disease space. There are a lot of crazy moms and dads and patients like me. And then finally, my favorite quote is this: a diagnosis is hope. It's little voice you hear whisper maybe when the entire world keeps shouting no. And this is rare disease advocate life. We don't do this, Little Miss Hannah Foundation's been around 8 years. We spend about 20 hours a week as a family collectively. We don't get paid. Heather doesn't get paid for Miracles from Lida. We do this in our spare time while holding down full-time jobs, hence the crazy part. But any little bit that you can help give us, supporting your families, encouraging them to be the next Heathers, be the next Melissas or Lukes or Carries. They're out there, they just need that confidence from you to be empowered to take those next steps. So thank you guys very much. If anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to answer any questions. Okay, say hi, Heather.
Thank you so much for doing this. This is not easy. We were talking in the back, and she's like, I'm very clinical sometimes when I talk about Hannah, and you might have been clinical with us that were sobbing.
I knew I saw it, I was like, oh, I don't need to do that.
No, you've been really, it's congratulations.
Thank you.
You've done great work. I love that you're talking about the undiagnosed population, and I just wanted to kind of feed on that. We were undiagnosed for 3 years, and even if you are 1 of 7 in the world, it's still really nice to have a home, to have a place to put that diagnosis, even if it's super rare, there is no hope. So I think that's one thing that you can help with your families as well. If there is nothing, we heard so many times, we just don't know. And I think that's another way that you can really collaborate. Try and give them something. It gives us some hope, and it makes a difference.
Absolutely. And I just I have my email on here. So if you guys have any families that don't know what to do or you're not sure what to do with them, please have them email me. I can connect them to people. I've got a pretty big network of rare disease parents and patients and nonprofit leaders that I would be more than happy to kind of introduce them to. So please use me as a resource as well. So thank you guys.